Okay, well, I think maybe some of you might be potentially interested. It's something that I'm interested in, and so it's maybe a little more niche of a topic than the other presenters. But I wanted to maybe, like Jimmy said, give an update. This is something that I presented on a couple of years ago at this conference when I was just starting out about this project, which I'll get into here. So my title is DNA-based identity testing in apples in search of the forgotten and old new. So kind of a strange title, but I'll talk about it as I go along here. So some backstory. We started a project here. Again, I'm based in Wasatch County and serve Wasatch and Summit counties, so along the Wasatch Back. And we started this Wasatch Back fruit tree project in 2023 with the goal of identifying and preserving fruit trees that survive and thrive along the Wasatch Back. And so far, we've had about 60 participants and about 350, more like 375 apple and peach trees that are being tracked. So this project was and is a citizen science, a community participatory project in which rather than planting a central orchard, which I would love to do, and show and demonstrate through that, we are aggregating those data on trees that people are currently growing and successfully growing along the Wasatch Back. And so we've had some good success in that, but a problem that we kept on running into, we asked participants to report their bloom and their harvest dates along with the tree name, the cultivar or variety. And the problem we kept running into was, people have a tree, they've got an apple tree, and they don't know what kind of apple it is, which is totally understandable moving into a home that has existing fruit trees, or just forgetting what fruit tree that was. So that was one issue we had, and so that kind of launched a project within the project. Was an interest of mine has always been the preservation of some of these older trees, and some of these trees that people have forgotten the names of. So the first step in this is to identify the name. What's the cultivar? And there are a couple ways to do this. Physically, people, sometimes will ask, well, what kind of apple is this? And that's actually very, very difficult to do, and to do well. So this is the phenotype of the apple, right? What does it look like? How does it taste? What are the defining characteristics of it? And I've linked here, this hyperlink should work. So if you're interested in honing your skills, there's actually kind of a tried and true process that some of the pros take when trying to identify an apple. And needless to say, it's quite difficult. This book up here in the top left, so I've included several books here that take on this problem. How to identify from the physical characteristics, how to identify apples. And the one on the top left is probably the most thorough, and it has somewhere upwards of 15 to 16,000 apple varieties just in North America. And a lot of those are extinct, and some of them may be redundant, but there's a lot of different apple varieties. And so that's why when we say, oh, what apple is this? It's true in a lot of cases, it's probably pulling from 10 to 20 of really popular apples, but it can be very difficult, even just with those. So the next way to determine what the name is of the apple, what the cultivar is through the DNA, right? Or the genotype, they call it. So this is a little fictitious thing that I created, but this is how one form of genotyping, they say, is done. So along that top, you'll see L1 and it counts up. So those are locations or locus along the strand of DNA. And all living things, of course, have DNA. I got that question once. Do apples really have DNA? But they do. And so along that long strand, there are specific places that have been chosen or predetermined to look at the DNA sequence, the A, T, C, or G of that specific apple tree. And they'll look at the same spots across many different apple trees, and they'll get the base code And then that becomes something of a DNA fingerprint. So just like our fingerprints, identify us, the DNA fingerprints, and this has been used in human forensics for a while, since the 80s or so, but it's now being used in fruit and other plants. So, for example, they'll look at all these, they'll look at the unknown apple, and they'll take the base code at each of those different locations or loci, and then they'll compare it against a reference bank that's already been genotyped. And so you can see they'll take those and compare it against the reference. And all of those, the ones in red, I've highlighted where it's different than the unknown apple we're testing. But the delicious apple we see matches it perfectly. And so through this method, you can get a very, very high accuracy level of matching and identifying what that unknown apple is. So in this fake example here, it would be a delicious apple. So our project, we received some funding and to identify some of these apples that we didn't know the name of. And I was particularly interested in the older apples. We use this service that's called My Fruit Tree. So this is available to the public, myfruittree.org. You can Google it. It's through Washington State University. It's $50 per sample. They send you a little tube like the one in the photo there, and you collect a leaf from the apple tree and you send that in. Turnaround time can be a little long, but for me, it's been about 6 months, and they'll send you back with your results. So in our project, we've submitted about 168 samples, so 168 trees with an unknown name. We don't know what the apple tree is. We're actually still waiting on about 47 of those samples. So of the 121 that we've received results for, 78 of those matched cultivars or varieties that were in the services database. And that database is one of the largest in the world. It's very extensive. And so most, and we'll talk about this a little more, I'll share about this, but most of the all the well-known apples, all of the really well-known heirloom apples are in this database, and many, many more. They have been several thousand. So 78 of the trees that we sampled and sent in matched cultivars in their database, and about 43, well, not about, 43 did not. So that's about a third that didn't match. So what does that mean? Well, there's kind of two options, right? One is that it's a legitimate cultivar that was once propagated and spread about, but it's been forgotten. It's not in the database, and that's not frequent, but it does happen. It can happen. While the second option is that the tree is a genetically unique seedling tree. So it's not a named cultivar. It's completely unique. It's kind of a one-off tree, and we'll talk some more about this. But I'm showing here some photos of the trees that we've sampled, and on the left there, you can see the tree trunk. This is a very old tree, potentially 100 to 120 years old. You can see there at the bottom, there's this real definite union, they call it a graft union, between the rootstock there on the bottom and then the scion or the fruiting variety up at the top. So if I tested this and it came back as unmatched or unidentifiable, I would be really curious, and this would be a piece of evidence that potentially it is a true old cultivar, but it just isn't in the database. Whereas if I saw a tree and I can't decide, or I can't decipher, can't find any evidence of that graft union, and sometimes it is quite difficult. But those I would lean more towards being a seedling tree rather than an old variety. So some of the cultivars we identified through these testing. Arkansas Black, I'm showing here on the photos here are all from the USDA watercolor collection, which if you click on this link here, when you get these slides, it'll take you and you can search, and it's an awesome resource and beautiful artwork. So we identified an Arkansas Black, Ben Davis, Duchess of Oldenburg, Gravenstein, Grimes Golden, a few crabs, Hislop and Whitney. Wealthy was very common in our area up here. Wine sap, Wolf River, yellow transparent is also very common. So these are just some of the trees that were unknown. People didn't know what they were, and through that testing service, we were able to identify them. And I selected some of the ones that I was interested in. There were several more common common types that people just didn't know the names of. But these are just a few of the ones that we identified. A couple interesting things. This isn't as dramatic as some of the human DNA test reveals and the repercussions from that, but there was one interesting result that this photo here is Huber Grove. It's up where I am in Midway, and it's an old historic orchard, probably 120, 130 years old, the oldest trees here. And a lot of the trees are not labeled. Some of them are suspected. We know some of them are that yellow transparent I talked about, and a couple of them were labeled as red astrakhan, which is another old Russian variety. But we tested those just to make sure, and those came back as wealthy. So we again, not as dramatic as human DNA test reveals, but it was interesting nonetheless. And then discovering some lost cultivars, we actually had a couple samples that we submitted that didn't match anything in the reference database in the panel that they accumulate, but it did match the DNA fingerprint of several other samples that had been submitted from different locations across the US. And so when that happens, it's good evidence that it's likely that those samples that we submitted are indeed, or at one time they were known cultivars, and they've just fallen out of favor, fallen out of production. But these, like I mentioned here, they're likely old, forgotten cultivars, and we're excited about that. And there's some more in-depth genotyping and phenotyping that's being done now to really try and identify what those old cultivars were. So I mentioned the other option, the other result is that you have these unique seedling trees. So these are a result of sexual reproduction, right, as opposed to grafting, which is asexual reproduction or cloning. So these trees are completely unique, genetically speaking, right? And you may have heard, you can't or you shouldn't grow apples from seed. And I think it all depends on what you're looking to get. I think you can. I know you can, and I think maybe you should if you want a genetically one-of-a-kind apple. Now, why wouldn't you? And this is what we hear a lot is because when compared again with grafting, reproducing a clone of the variety, sexual reproduction in apples is a genetic lottery, right? And so you might get a real awful tasting apple. You might get one that tastes great. This photo I'm showing here is of a yet to be named seedling tree that is found in a little canyon close by here that has great taste. And so we're excited about that one because it's came back as unidentifiable. And so we're pretty sure with the location and the DNA testing that it is its own little seedling, and it's something that I really enjoy going to pick, and we are doing some work with it. So what do you do when you find a good seedling tree? Well, I'd say propagate it, trial it, observe it, name it, and share it. So that's what we're doing here. Showing just a few of the trees that we've taken scion wood from and we've grafted onto a rootstock. And so these are now going to be grown up, and we're going to trial them, we're going to observe them and spread them out into the community because these trees were all found to be producing well, and older trees. They've survived for many generations here along the Wasatch Back. So we're giving life to our old new trees, right? So they're old. The parent tree, the mother tree is old, but they're a new variety. There's something new that we're growing and we're going to test. And this has happened. I mean, if you look at all of the history of the old apple varieties, they're all coming from seedling, right? They're all coming from seedling trees. And there's a few examples in Utah, one being this Capitol Reef Red, which is only found in the Torrey orchards down in southern Utah in Capitol Reef. And it's a unique great apple. And again, it's only found there. There's another one which I don't have a photo of, but it's called the Elliott Gold apple, and that was a seedling tree that was found by a farmer in Provo, Utah, on his stream bank, and that was propagated up and is in some commercial orchards today. So it's not without precedence that these seedling trees become real bona fide cultivars. So with that, I should put my email on here. I'm happy to take any questions, or if you have any questions you want to email me, chat if you have old trees in your orchards you want to talk about, I'm all ears. So thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Wes. It tells a really fun story, I guess, looking at some of the old apple varieties and seeing where they're grown. It's really cool. I have a question. I don't have any yet. So if anyone has any questions, just a reminder, put them in the Q&A box and we can answer those. But my question, so you're talking about working with this one apple variety. Do you have a name for it yet? If you're going to name that seedling, or is that classified?
Yeah, that is classified actually. What we do is we're working with our those community members who tell us about it and who bring it in. We're gonna let them name it. And so she has a name that she wants to give, but uh we're not we're trying to be careful with it. And I should say, I meant to say this. This isn't direct response to your question, Ben, but this isn't to denigrate or to make light of like large scale apple breeding programs, because that is an incredibly arduous and long-term project. I mean, it's a couple decades before they're producing a new apple cultivar into the market. And this is a completely different purpose in that it's very hyper local, and we're not interested in trying to make, the next big apple, but just something that's interesting and local and unique in that way. So I wanted to make that plug because the breeding programs that are breeding for the larger audience, it's definitely a much more arduous process.
Okay. One question, I might make it into a bigger one, but this is from Sandra and Sandy. Where can I buy a wine sap tree? And maybe a follow-up question to that is if you're looking for some of these old cultivars, is there a place or a resource that you might recommend that people could buy some of the ones that are not like the big commercial varieties?
Yeah, it's a great question. There's actually a pretty large, well, I guess they're relatively small, but it's an active community around heirloom, particularly heirloom apples, but I'd say heirloom fruit trees in general. It's been my experience that a lot of those, especially the harder to find older varieties, are going to be offered mostly online through online vendors. So I would search those. There's really a million different vendors that offer them. But Google search, is going to be your friend on that. Wine sap in particular, I wouldn't say that is too terribly obscure, and so you might be able to find that in your local nursery, but it's I know it's offered online and you can find it on different rootstocks and all sorts of stuff. You might even, here I'll put a plug in for Mike Pace, his grafting workshops. If you sign up for those, I know he usually grabs some wine sap scion wood, and so you can graft your own apple. So that could be another option.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, that's how they're doing the preservation, I guess. So you have the variety that you're trying to keep, you have to graft it. And that's how you're preserving some of those old varieties.
Yeah.
Anna War pointed out something else to look at is they do, there's a scion swap coming up locally. So that's wherever Anna's at. But looking on Facebook Marketplace or different places to see some of those fun activities or events do pop up from time to time, especially in
Yeah,
areas that focus on apples more for sure.
totally. Yeah, and I think the it might be the Utah Native Plant Society. I know they do a seed and a scion swap, and yeah, and again, the online community is very strong. One forum that I frequent often is called Growing Fruit, and so that one you can really get lost in. But there's all sorts of forums and groups, and yeah, our local scene, there's a lot of trading going on.
So we're about out of time. A couple comments. Someone having an old orchard of like 40 different trees. One plug I would put in. So Wesley, has it been 2 years since we had you present on this topic a little bit more in depth?
Yeah,
Years ago, I think. So if you go to the Diverse Ag website for this conference, you can look at past workshops. One that Wes did a couple years ago, a little bit more in depth on the same topic. So this is kind of a follow-up to that one. But if you want to go and look and see how that works. Mike Pace also did one on pruning apples as well. So in addition to his workshops, that's one that you could look at if you wanted to try your hand at pruning and you can't make it to one of the workshops. So just a plug on a couple of those. Oh, and thanks, Katie. She stuck that in the chat for the website, but to go back and watch some other ones.